Hello, I'm Neophytos Loizides. I'm a professor in international conflict analysis at the University of Kent. Today I'm going to be talking about the resurgent nationalism, the future of ethnopolitics in the 21st century. I'm going to try to answer three questions. Are nationalism and ethnic violence resurging? Second, where, when, and how? And thirdly, what can we do about it? Let me first guide you through the definition of the term nationalism. Oxford Dictionary offers a very interesting definition. It argues that this is the identification with one's own nation in support of its interests. The definition is fair-minded. It argues that it can be a proper approach to running a society, but it could lead to the exclusion or detriment to the interest of other nations. The example that the Oxford Dictionary offers, that nationalism can't be tempered by the desire to join the European Union, is an example that was very much popular in the 1990s. It sounds a little bit ironic today with the rise of nationalism within the continent, with Brexit, and with Eastern European nations very much in opposition to the European project. The speaker has produced a map of Europe with not only the countries and their flags in it, but also with the right-wing movements and how those have spread throughout Germany and Austria and the United Kingdom and their successful electoral breakthroughs. And there are many reasons why nationalism is resurging. This is because of globalization and new inequalities that have marginalized large parts of the lower middle class. It also relates to the new technologies, social media, the fact that we live in our own bubbles. We cannot understand as members of the society other segments of the population, and also because in the social media it's much easier for radical groups to come together and coordinate and have a political impact. Other factors involve the distancing of our education and our learning from World War II and the lessons learned during World War II that should never have been repeated, and also new technologies with regards to welfare and also other conditions, economic, political, that have been driving modern nationalism. But there's also conflicting evidence when it comes to the rise of deadly violence. And here I will show you two graphs that very much represent the key puzzle that we're addressing in our work. On the one hand, data collected by colleagues at PRIO demonstrated after World War II there has been an actual decline in the rise of battle deaths. And in fact, what have been saying and arguing in the media might not necessarily reflect realities on the ground. On the other hand, if one looks at the data collected by the United Nations with regards to refugees, the numbers of displaced persons, of refugees and IDPs have been in record levels since World War II. So, the key puzzle here is the following. If nationalism and ethnic conflict and their manifestations are more and more present, we have to expect more people dying and more refugees. If they have been declining, you would expect fewer people dying and fewer refugees. Yes, the data show that we're facing a very conflicting situation with more people leaving their homes, but battle deaths themselves decreasing. Why this is possible? Basically, because it's attractive to elites. If you're in a position of an ethnic cleansing of a dictator, it's much more profitable to ethnically cleanse an undesirable minority rather than commit a genocide. There are very strict norms when it comes to genocide. One can think of the recent reactions to the chemical attacks in Syria, where the dozens of people have been killed. Yet the same norms do not apply when it comes to IDPs and refugees. The 10 million people or so who have been ethnically cleansed since the war in Syria have not produced the same reaction. So the feasibility argument is very important very important here. But it's also very important to understand the where argument. Part of the world that is becoming less conflictual involves countries in Asia that have shown remarkable consent, remarkable restraint when it comes to their conflicts with each other and with North Korea. Part of the world is becoming much more peaceful in the European continent. The Latin American countries have essentially eliminated ethnic conflict after the recent peace treaty in Colombia, the peace agreement between FARC and the Colombian government. Very recently, the government of Belize and Guatemala have agreed to resolve their conflicts in the International Court of Justice. And not only have they addressed this conflict in an international court, they asked the people to vote in a referendum to agree on these formulas. So there's a confidence in many parts of the world that people like peace and people are willing to find this. But this is not the case much of the Middle East, where we have seen demonstration effects, one conflict leading to another, Iraq leading to Syria, conflicts with the Kurds leading to conflict between Sunnis and Shia, weakening of international norms when it comes to the rights of the displaced and the obligations of the international community either to intervene or to support the displaced persons. We're facing here a double challenge where, on the one hand, we have more victims of conflict. On the other hand, societies are becoming less capable, less willing, and less open to support the victims of conflict. And this tendency is very much a result of majoritarian political systems. The fact that our political systems are not equipped to support minority groups. Majoritarian systems such as the ones in the United Kingdom, the United States, Japan, very important country that is facing underpopulation, are less willing to support refugees and IDPs coming from many of the conflict zones around the world. On the contrary, on the other side of the spectrum, you have consensus democracies, such as the ones in Germany, that have shown that are much more willing to accept refugees and IDPs within their borders. So the question here becomes a combination of weak international norms as well as political systems that are less willing to address many of the challenges in the international system. If I had to make 3 predictions of how, on the basis of the existing data and research, of 3 predictions as to what is going to happen in the future, what is the future of ethnopolitics. The first prediction relates to majoritarian democracies, countries that have a set of electoral institutions that lack institutional constraints. I will argue that those are, on the one hand, more prone to conflict themselves, on the other, less supportive when it comes to third countries and victims of conflict, particularly refugees. A good comparison one might want to have in mind is a contrast between Germany and Japan. Both countries have fought and lost World War II. They have developed a very strong pacifist culture. Japan takes no refugees. Last year, it accepted only 28, while Germany is the country that accepts the largest numbers of refugees and IDPs in the world. This is partly of the domestic politics within each country. On the one hand, Japan adopted a majoritarian electoral system. On the other, Germany has a consensual electoral system, what Leibhardt calls a gentler and kinder type of democracy. The second prediction I will make is that this problem, the issue of IDPs and refugees, will continue to be salient in international politics simply because it's extremely difficult to change international norms. Perhaps we may have fewer casualties as part of the international system and checks and balances. On the other, IDPs and refugees will continue to be a major challenge in international politics. Likewise, based on the existing data and projecting on the existing data, the Middle East will continue to be radicalized. This is not partly because of Islam, this is not partly because of anything to do with culture, Arab culture, or anything that has been previously argued, but simply because the Middle East lacks positive examples. Middle East had a wonderful, diverse political culture in the 19th and 18th centuries, which have led to federations, consensual political system, yet its early advantages in pluralism did not translate into a politically institutionalized consensual political system or set of political systems. Therefore, Middle East is lacking the successful regional examples that have addressed conflicts in other parts of the world. In the absence of those examples, conflict will perpetuate. What needs to be done? Number one, taming the populist trend through new norms and research, particularly with regards to victims of conflicts. As I argue in this lecture, the rights of the displaced persons, whether they've been displaced themselves or whether their parents or grandparents have been displaced, should be clearly protected by international law. In terms of domestic politics within countries that can welcome refugees, it's very important that we overcome the integration versus return fallacy. This is what we found in our research. Often, return and integration are treated as two opposites. Either refugees integrate into a new culture or are being forced to return back to where they came from. What we have found in our research is that the more integrated refugees are, the more likely are going to return back to their countries. It's also important to think of new technologies that could serve displaced persons. I argue at the beginning of my lecture that new technologies are partly responsible for the rise of nationalism, whether this involves Facebook and Twitter and closed networks, whether it involves new technologies. It's time to reverse this tendency, and it's time to think of how technologies can serve displaced persons, can serve individuals in need. But it's also important that we reinvent new cooperative approaches to international problems, involve international arbitration when it comes to protracted conflicts, as the example, very recent example of Guatemala and Belize suggest, but also invest in long-term conflict resolution approaches, invest in new generations, invest in peace education that has been shown to be so important when it comes to conflict resolution. Thank you very much.